Good evening, everyone, and welcome to this Innovation for Agriculture webinar series. My name is Aaron Redman. I'm the Soils and Natural Resources Advisor at Innovation for Agriculture, and I shall be discussing with our four fantastic panelists cultivating resilience. Can I just remind anyone who's attending this webinar to add your questions into the Q&A tab, which is just at the bottom of your Zoom screen. I hope everyone can see it. It's like a little square bubble with a question mark in it. So if you could add your questions into that area, that would be fantastic. So with me online are four fantastic guests. Andrew Court, arable beef farmer from Coates Lodge Farm, Staffordshire. Andrew is an experimental with his farm management, creating and testing new methodology to increase business efficiency, farm resilience, and environmental health. David Newman and Tracy Russell from Buxton Market Garden, a unique 16-acre rotationally productive horticultural farm. David and Tracy integrate a diversity of well-designed techniques and systems that I can say I have never seen before. David and Tracy are also the Soil Farmers of the Year from 2024. And then we have Laura Awdry, who is a beef and arable farmer with her husband Sam on a Duchy of Cornwall farm tenancy at Trendale Farm in Cornwall. Laura is a Nuffield Scholar, completing her research in 2008, I believe, on sustainable dairy beef production. Laura and Sam now run quite a unique beef system that we should hear more about momentarily, incorporating smart business modeling with high animal health and welfare and sustainability. Andrew and Laura are also part of the Climate Farm Demo project, where we are carrying out carbon audits and using this data to create adaptation and mitigation plans over a 5-year period, taking us to 2030. So we're here today to discuss resilience within farm businesses. Farm resilience is the capacity of a farm system to anticipate, reduce, absorb, adapt to, and recover from various challenges such as climate change, economic shifts, policy change, and environmental stresses, ensuring sustained productivity, profitability, and sustainability over a long period of time. All three of the businesses here today are cultivating resilience, so I think it's time to hear a little bit more from them. If we could start with David and Tracy, followed by Laura and then Andrew. So David and Tracy, could you give us a little bit of background to your farm and your opinions on why cultivating resilience is important to you? I believe we do have a couple of slides and presentations that we might need to just upload.
You want to talk about what we do while we wait to see a slide?
Yeah, do you want to introduce yourselves at least?
So I'm Tracy.
And I'm David. And we're the partnership and husband and wife of the company, which is Buxton, based in Buckinghamshire. This is a business that, I mean, I'm a passionate gardener, have been all my life, and this has come about over many years of development. So we've been basically trading for 20 years now. And ever since we started, we've been down the road of low inputs and direct selling. So that's the sort of the basis of the business, to try and develop as much as we can with the least amount of inputs and direct sell it to the end user to get that connection.
Right, so we've only got 10 minutes. So I'm going to start with question one was, and sorry, there's no fancy PowerPoints. You get 4 images and us talking. So how are we already adapting to climate change? In image number 1, you will see one of the things that we do is think really carefully about our cropping selections and the variety and choice. So one of the crops that's been doing really well for us over the last couple of years is sweet potatoes. And we grow sweet potatoes and melons together in a polytunnel in the summer, and that polytunnel in the winter goes down to winter salad.
And so obviously why sweet potatoes is relevant because they're very rarely grown in the UK, but it's a crop that we've dabbled with and found with the added protection of a polytunnel, we can get very reliable crops and obviously a good margin. And hopefully the melons most years do very well as well. They're a bit more tricky, but hopefully not too bad.
Water storage and distribution is one of the next points. And the sweet potato is a really good example of this. So yeah, here's our reservoir. So this holds 1.5 million gallons when it's full. We're on clay, so it's naturally clay lined. But when we're watering both in the tunnels and in the field, we're using drip line irrigation on a lot of the crops. So we're literally only delivering the water exactly where it's needed. That reduces our weed burden and saves us from wasting loads of water. You don't want to be throwing water around into the air in a hot summer like 2022. You want to be getting every bit exactly where you want it.
The water in this reservoir is all harvested rainwater, so we're not pumping anywhere. There's no energy used to get it to the reservoir. It comes naturally through the drainage of the field above the polytunnels, and it's collected by us from the runoff from the field drainage system. So through the winter, we can collect this water.
So you can see in the picture here, we try and work with the weather and with the wind rather than fighting it. So the banks of the reservoir are kind of the first point where they direct the wind up and over the reservoir. And then instead of standard flat doors on the ends of the polytunnels, we've made these hooped ends so that the wind comes up, is diverted up by the banks of the reservoir, is then diverted over. You can just see the small propagation tunnels. Again, they lift the wind up and over, and then they divert it round. So we try and work with the weather rather than fighting it. In the early years, we lost 2 whole tunnels to hurricanes, 1 to a tornado, and then we lost the skins from 2 just before the lockdowns.
That's right.
So we went into lockdowns 2 tunnels down, just as the entire world turned up to the farm wanting fresh veg.
And also we've located the tunnels in the best shelter position, because obviously we're not a very exposed site, but a reasonably exposed site. So we've considered that in the construction of the layout basically.
And then in the last few years, we've added some agroforestry lines in the middle of the field, breaking up the plots, and those will eventually become not only fruiting crops with apples, pears, plums, and gauges to sell through the shop, but as windbreak, and they bring more birds into the field. So we've got more natural predators for the astonishing number of caterpillars that we still have in November this year. But finally, I think the really important bit, we work with our community and we work really closely with our customers so that they understand what's happening on the farm all the time, and why crops might be late, or why crops might not look very pretty, or why this is really good to eat now rather than that. So, when we lose the skin of a polytunnel, people say, oh, well, will insurance cover it? And it's like, that's not really the point. The point is, we've lost that entire crop. So right now we're not eating this, but we're eating this. And we have to wait for a warm and sunny, still day. So we keep communicating with them all the time, and we find that our customers work really well with us, and are really trusting of the stories that we're telling and the food that we're bringing to them, and that makes a massive difference. Oh, we need to move faster than this, don't we? So future management, what would we do differently? We get involved in any and every trial that's going, and I'll let David tell you a bit more about them.
So some of the trials we've been involved in with the polytunnels, we've been trying a different skin. So rather than using standard polythene, we've been using something called ETFE, which is a polymer which can then be recycled endlessly back into itself. Whereas a polythene, obviously, as you move down its recycling phase, it becomes something else, but it can never go back to where it came from. So a thing like that's been very useful, and it's also given us better light translucence for the crops, so we grow better crops under it as well. So hopefully that's something we can expand on. We've been doing some intercropping trials, so we've now moved forward in our cropping phase of our rotation, where we actually have clover lines in the cropping phase. So as well as giving better soil structure, we've also started the phase of feeding our soil as we take a cash crop off, and then the following year it go into a herbal lay for its 3-year phase, but it comes around in year 4 to be cropped again for the vegetables. So that's been a good trial, and then we're starting now some small trials with strip tillage as well, which will potentially change where we crop again as we go forward, but that's quite experimental at the moment.
And we might do another trial with the biochar and we trialled the lights that we propagate all of our tomatoes and chilies.
Yeah,
And
we have
that was a really good
so we
trial.
have LED lights, grow lights, so that was a good little trial we ran. And then we had a good deal. We bought the lights from us, pre-loved, which was very nice.
That was good. The next point was reducing emissions. And one of the things that we've always done that not only reduces emissions but reduces our cost is have very efficient routes. So I go off farm twice a week. I pick up from other local producers and I deliver all of our salad deliveries on the same circular loop. So we literally go off farm twice, out, pick up potatoes, onto the next stop, deliver salad, onto the next stop, pick up onions and cabbages, for example, onto the next stop, deliver salad again. And at the end of that loop comes the junk food cafe where we take any surplus that's left over from the shop before. So we try and make circular economies wherever we can, making sure that nothing's wasted. We pick up hops from the local brewery, which we mix into our green waste. I pick up coffee grinds from the cafes that I'm delivering to, and bring them back and put them into the compost heap. And this year, when our trusty old van finally died, we bought a van that has HVO, so reducing the emissions on that. You want to talk about sheep, not tractors?
So our herbal lays, which is part of our rotation, we don't need to top those because we have a local flock of sheep that come and graze them for us. So obviously, apart from saving us time, it's saving us fuel. Obviously, the other important thing there is we're getting some of the microbiology from their drop-ins into our fields as well. So that's a whole win-win for us. So much less time managing the herbal lays. The only time we'd have to top them if there was a problem with thistles, potentially, was obviously spread seed, which we wouldn't want to happen.
So that saves us time, and it saves fossil fuels, and it saves us money. And having someone else's sheep is definitely the way to have sheep. So with no responsibility for them and all the pleasure of having some really beautiful creatures in the field with us. And then again, coming back to eating seasonally and talking a lot about why we do it. The deer population in the last few years has skyrocketed. Deer are quite a problem for our fruit trees, for some of our crops. I'm an ex-vegetarian and vegan. I'm currently eating quite a bit of venison because actually eating the pests is probably one of the most sustainable things that we can do. That meat hasn't left the farm. A lot of our customers are vegetarian, and talking to them about climate-friendly diets, I think, is really important. An avocado might have traveled 4,000 miles to your plate, but this piece of protein that I've eaten this week has traveled half a mile. And just holding open conversations and talking about the nuances of different things. So we describe our diet as mainly plant-based, but climate-friendly flexitarian. And I just think having a bit less division, a bit less it's this way or it's that way, really helps people to understand what working with the land is all about, and what climate-friendly diets might look like. Right, you're right, we're at the 10 minutes. So the overall impact of actions on resilience. This was one of your points.
So one of the biggest things we're working with is the circular economy and the our food hubs. So trying to keep things much more local, so the money is spent within our local communities as well, and people then hopefully aren't traveling so far. So the whole thing becomes much more, beneficial to the whole bigger community as well as us. So our message is becoming spread within our community as well.
So one of the projects that we've been working on since we won the Soil Farmer of the Year award is trying to working with other local farmers, trying to persuade them to give up an acre or two to have market gardens on their land, and sharing our skills so that we get more growers spreading out, feeding more and more of the local community, and getting more and more people connected to their food and understanding what they can do to make a difference. Because it's only when you get people onto the land and passionate about the land and recognizing what a curlew sounds like when they come in to nest in the summer, that they start to care about it and look after it and think about what they can do in their lives. And the very final question was, do we use tools to measure things? We got asked this in the Soil Farmer judging, and came up with the answer that we are the tools in the box. It's really important, just have your hands in the soil, be stomping up and down the field, understand your land. We're tiny, so we can be very connected to it, but we don't use any fancy
Measures.
measures.
tools, no.
And we've run over, so it's over to the next person now, I think.
Thank you so much, guys. That's really interesting. I've been privileged enough to visit Buxom, and it really is amazing place to see. And some of the things that you guys, my mum's a horticulturalist. We've got a market garden at our farm. What you guys are doing, I've never seen before. So yeah, if anyone does get the chance to go visit Buxom, I highly recommend it. So yeah, Laura, are you good to follow on?
I am. What I might do is turn my camera off because I have a feeling my terrible Cornish internet might not cope with me sharing my screen and doing slides at the same time. Bear with me. Right. Hopefully, can everyone see that?
Yeah, that's great. Thank you.
Brilliant. I'll turn the camera off just in case we crash. Well, my name's Laura Awdry. My husband Sam and I farm a partnership in Cornwall. We actually moved to this farm 2 years ago. Previous to that, we had been farming in a traditional sort of mixed family farm up in Wiltshire. The new farm we have at the moment, it's 334 acres. So it was a mixed sort of arable sheep and beef farm. It's got about 105 acres of permanent pasture, some rotational grass. Since we've arrived, we've put in about 126 acres of sort of herbal lays. I've put multi-species swords there as well because I know there's a bit of dispute over what herbal lay is and a multi-species sward. We also have some spring cropping. We have spring barley, and we have some various sort of stewardship options as well on the farm, such as sort of wildflower margins, and we've got some sort of, I guess, marginal land, steep banks. And so for us, we thought instead of trying to fight against nature, be better to put those into some stewardship options. We've also got quite a lot of woodland and scrub on the farm as well. We are sort of predominantly, well, we're a beef farm, but we are kind of I guess a different type of beef farm in terms of the fact that actually our suckler proportion is quite small. We've only got 38 sucklers at the moment. We're trying to build a closed herd, and predominantly most of our beef comes from our calf rearing enterprise. So we rear about 600 calves a year. We work in partnership with some local dairy farms. We've developed a good relationship there. They sort of breed their cows to Angus's, and Angus animal suits our grazing-based system. And so we rear 2 blocks, about 300 in the autumn and around 300 in the spring as well. So there's usually around an average, I guess, of 150 sort of growing, finishing cattle grazing on the farm, which we've kept as well. So yeah, a couple of pictures I thought I'd put together just to show the differences in the system. So we do rear them. We have a mixture of sort of sheds and rearing systems, some with automatic machines, some with sort of hand feeding. I think you can see in that picture they're eating some willow. We do try some alternative things with our calf rearing as well. And obviously we use a lot of herbal lays for our growing and grazing cattle. And since we've moved to this new farm, sort of it's I suppose it's with any new farm, it takes you probably quite a while to learn the ropes. And I quite liked what you were saying earlier on, actually, guys, about getting to know your land and knowing what it can do. I think over the last 2 years it's been a real learning curve for us to sort of get to know this land and how it works and how it functions and what we can do with it. So when we arrived, I guess this picture is actually quite typical. We had about 169 acres of the farm was just like this. It had potatoes, arable, veg production, and there was actually only about 100 acres of grassland. So that's quite nerve-wracking, I suppose, when you're a farmer turning out with a lorry with lots of cattle, and you kind of got to start from scratch. So we kind of scrabbled together. I think for us, we knew soil health is a really big focus for my husband and I. We both did the 3LM holistic management course, and I think that's when things really changed for us, looking at how we'd been farming previously and how we wanted to be farming more with soil health in mind. And obviously that has its benefits into livestock production as well. So we kind of frantically got cover crops, grass lays and everything in, just to get that soil covered, as we saw that was a way of obviously avoiding any runoff. And I thought I put this one in here too. We're quite lucky. So a few tools that we do use, I guess, to sort of monitor things are some soil samples, and this was actually as we went into the farm. So I think it was quite a nice visual, kind of showing you where the permanent pasture was, the sort of darker blue areas and some of that organic matter level there. And also you can hopefully see the big green tract in the middle, and most of this is all what has been sort of intensive brassicas, potatoes, and arable over the last few years. So going in, it was really nice to have this. I think it kind of gives you a baseline, and then we can kind of work towards what changes we make over the future, and we can measure it and see how our systems and how operating is actually sort of increasing that soil organic matter. Because I think for us, we want to have an increase in soil organic matter, not only for sort of carbon storage, but water sequestration into the landscape as well. I think it's really vital for our farming system. So since we've been here, we've been using mixtures of things like cover cropping and forage cropping. We've been using herbal lays, ultimately with that goal of improving the soil structure on the farm, water infiltration rates, and just kind of getting a functioning soil, I guess, and healthy ecosystem. And for us, livestock was definitely one of the tools. We wanted to be able to sort of reduce sort of our reliance on artificial inputs, artificial fertilizers, not use as much fuel, tractor work, and have a really animal-based sort of system. So I mentioned herbal lays or multi-species swords. These are a really big part of our production system. They are used for all of our sort of young stock. So once the calves are obviously reared, they're weaned, they'll go out and sort of adjust to grass. And we don't normally put them on until about sort of they're six months of age realistically, but they'll go out there and graze that for the system. And we obviously also finish all of our autumn-born cattle on this as well. We've had a lot of large arable fields, so we've had to use a lot of semi-permanent electric fencing, high tensile sort of lanes down the middle, lots of blue pipe over land, and mobile water troughs, because obviously it's quite an expensive feat, taking on a new farm to fence 10,000 acres and cash flow that. So electric fencing has been our friend, as we wanted to be able to use the animals as a tool. Obviously, having had a lot of intensive veg production, we wanted to use these multi-species swords to sort of encourage deeper rooting depths, and be able to sort of access some of those minerals potentially down in the soil as well. And also part of using them, I guess, and this is in terms of maybe the adaptation, is the actual kind of, I guess, profitability side of it. We're not using any artificial fertilizer to establish these lays. We are getting incredibly good animal performance off them. And we're actually able to we don't use any concentrate feed for our livestock as well for the finishing periods. They generally go off concentrate at 7 months of age and don't have it again. So we're able to get a really, really good sort of balanced diet with minerals as well. And we're a bit different, I guess. Most traditional people grass measure and you plate meat with a herbal lay. They do not like going over lovely big high covers like this with chicory. So Sam and I sort of calculate and keep track with some holistic plain grazing. And so we calculate the utilised forage. So we kind of calculate this by working out the daily live weight gain and sort of the kilograms of beef produced per hectare, and work that back as to how much we're actually growing on those that ground as well. And I think with the herbal lays as well, I mentioned about sort of the performance, but they have, incredibly high crude protein levels and energy as well. So being able to have a mixed diet, I suppose we don't go and eat one plate of food. If we're going to load our plate up, we want to have some salad, some veg, a bit of meat, and a balanced diet. And we find this works really well for our livestock as well. And not only sort of in terms of performance, I guess down to our management and rotation, we don't do any routine worming as well. Obviously, we're moving our livestock frequently, and we do have a rich sort of variety of herbs that are in those mixes there. And I have popped this in here as well, because I guess this kind of leads back to that adaptation. This is a traditional grass growth curve in the UK, and there's always that dip in the summer. And I guess going forward, we knew we were going to be a pasture-based system, and we didn't want to have to be reliant on fertilizer. We needed to have that continuous supply of grass growth. And what we found with those herbal lays is we don't get that sharp sort of peak in May, but what we get is a really nice sustained line. So if you could imagine, there was another line there in red, just a really nice curve that sort of avoids those dips in July, obviously, because we get all the clovers and the chicory and everything else creating a really strong biomass. So it's about balancing that diet for the livestock over the grazing season. And I guess other ways we're looking at sort of reducing our impact as well. We obviously don't want to rely heavily on fossil fuels. Yes, when we took on that farm, we had the ability to start with a lot of fresh, I suppose, cultivated soil, but we don't want to necessarily be doing that. So looking at ways of rejuvenating pasture with minimal sort of use. We've tried some overseeding into permanent pasture by some of the sheds. So we've just gone over with the discs and don't want to use any sprays. We're trying to sort of, I guess, if you're looking at the regenerative principles of lack of soil disturbance, trying to minimize any sort of soil disturbance. So we've used the cattle to sort of graze it down tight, drilled over the top of it, and then put them back out there to keep any competition down. And that's just been a way for us to sort of improve those layers, get some deep breeding species in, again, to help with sequestration and build up some of that organic matter. But again, it's sort of improving that pasture. And hopefully in a sort of more sustainable way. We also do arable, but we use a lot of cover cropping. Unlike, I guess, a traditional arable farmer, we're looking at the above ground biomass as well as the below ground biomass. So we want to ensure that whatever that cover crop is, it's still going to be able to sort of grow those livestock healthily and keep those daily live weights up. Because I think you've seen from those pictures, we really want to try and improve that soil organic matter. And if we can obviously be using a lot of high impact animal grazing and using that manure to get back out onto that arable ground, that sort of is helping us long term as well. And as you can see, we're getting massive improvement in terms of that soil health. I'm trying to think what date it was. I think this was about 2 weeks after drilling the spring barley this year, and I was very excited digging holes, trying to pull out rooting structures just to sort of check out what the roots were doing. And this is one of our bale grazed fields that had quite heavy animal impact. So we've just found by increasing the legumes within our system, increasing the animal sort of impact on some of those areas, it's really helped in terms of our soil biology. And I'm also a really big fan of working with what you've got on a farm. Obviously, we've inherited a really mixed farm here, and it did come with a lot of permanent grassland. And there's ways to be able to manage this. I think, we know that grassland is an incredible store of organic matter and a great carbon sink. And through we've learned to adapt our grazing. We're doing quite high impact mob grazing with long rotational sort of rounds, sometimes up to 3, 4, 5 months on some of them. We don't use any fertilizer, and we've used some sort of species rich bale grazing as well to sort of incorporate more seeds into this. But we're finding what we want is we've got some really good grassland and really good organic matter locked up in the soil already. How can we use that to our advantage? How can we get really good animal performance? Because at the end of the day, we want to be able to sort of have our cows calving at 24 months. We want to have those animals finishing and off the farm before 24 months, sort of to look at a reduction, I guess, in terms of if we're thinking from a methane level. So managing our grasslands, and I guess managing and making sure you've got the right cow for the right place. We use our sucklers on these kind of more native pastures. And we find that they work well in terms of converting that forage and obviously growing that calf. And we're actually focusing our sort of finishing and our dairy beef and our calf rearing enterprise on sort of that more lowland ground where we can be more intensive. And I think it's just about looking at your farm and your landscape and working out what works best there. But that is probably enough from me. I'll stop sharing my screen now.
Brilliant. Thank you so much, Laura. And last but not least, Andrew, do you mind sharing a bit of your background and answer some of the questions that we've previously asked?
Okay, everybody. Good evening. Thank you for taking the time to watch this with us. Hopefully, I will be able to do half the job that my previous speakers have done. It's absolutely fascinating. So my name is Andrew Court. I'm a farmer from Staffordshire. Much like Laura, I am a beef and arable farmer. However, my farming is more leaning towards the arable rather than towards the beef cattle. So a little bit of history. My grandparents bought the farm back in the 1950s, and back then, if you can see the picture in the top right corner, it was a truly mixed farm. The bottom lawn was given over completely to market gardening, and the farm workers would finish dealing with all the other jobs during the day, and then at lunchtime they'd be sent out to pick the broad beans. And there's a row of broad beans in that picture that I think is about a quarter of a mile long. So yeah, it was a truly mixed farm with pigs, hens, everything. Then over the years, my uncle took over the business and it became a dairy farm. And then in the dairy crisis of 2010, it needed a lot of investment to keep going. So he gave that up and took it on as a suckler farm. And then in 2020, right at the start of lockdown, we were given the opportunity. My uncle wanted to scale down. So he sold his share of the farm to my mother, and we took over the farm completely from scratch. So we had no machinery. The buildings were, for want of a better description, falling down, and we got a blank canvas really. So my brother and I sat down and decided what we wanted to do. My interest lay in arable, and he was very much a livestock man. So we came up with this plan. The farm itself is 274 acres. We've got 200 acres in rotational arable, and then the rest is either permanent pasture or woodland. So I grew up studying engineering, and I got to learn a lot more about the environment before it perhaps became a buzzword for large scale farmers. But the one thing that we do want to do is try and let everything that leaves the farm, we want to enter into a human consumption food chain. We're not interested in growing for energy. We're not interested in growing corn to feed animals. We want to sell really high quality, nutrient rich produce, which I think chimes with our other speakers tonight. But we don't want it to be to the detriment of the soil and of our land. So that's really our philosophy when trying to make a decision moving forward. So we began by wanting to baseline. At the time, we got involved with a research project with Leaf, and we baselined our farm so we knew where it stood. We're on a very light sandy soil, which was very determined an awful lot of what we did, and we looked at what the carbon emissions were after a year and a half in business, and that gave us a real steer as to where we wanted to go and what we wanted to do. Before I tell the story, I would like to add a few caveats. So be wary of monitoring tools, particularly things like carbon calculators. What you can see here is the carbon emissions for our arable enterprise, which looks absolutely atrocious. But actually, everything is calculated based on the yield of the crops. And this was taken in a year where our yields were very low, but our quality was very high. So we actually had very high quality milling wheat, which traditionally yields far less. So it makes our carbon audit look absolutely terrible, but it doesn't. So don't just take the top line value. It is sort of my message with this slide. So we started or I started wanting to create an arable rotation, and the reason I wanted to do this was I wanted to really focus on our soil health, because if we create a sustainable soil that requires less inputs and is much more regenerative in its biology and its fungal activity, then we can lower our day-to-day costs, our input costs. And also the plants will be able to ride out any kind of sort of climate storm. And we can reduce the amount of operations that we have to do, which again brings down our costs even more. So when we began, I started by looking at rotation. So I didn't want to have continuous cereals or 2 years of cereals and then a break and then back to the same cereals. So last year we developed it to a point where we were involving winter wheat. We've got winter beans, or we've been using spring peas. We've got winter barley, oilseed rape, and spring oats. We use quite a range of different things, but we're not scared to try new stuff. This year we've tried growing sunflowers as well. There's been an opportunity for us to try those as a different break crop, which on paper sounds absolutely fantastic. There's very little pest or disease issues there. So by building those into our rotation, we can help to continually encourage soil development, which is really good. It helps us to remove green bridges when thinking about the pesticide use, and also there's nitrogen fixing plants in there as well to help reduce the fertilizer, and different crops have different burdens and all that sort of thing. And then intertwined with that is the use of cover crops. We sit in a groundwater catchment zone, so our funding for cover crops doesn't come from SFI. We use Severn Trent, because for every £1 they spend on us growing cover crops, they save themselves £9 in treatment. So it's hugely beneficial, not just to them, but to us as well. So this is the sort of story that we've been on up to this point. And year on year, we've seen our soil structure improve. In the drought years, our barley's continue to grow for a lot longer than our neighbours, as a good example. We've used less fertilizer every year, and our quality has certainly increased. We started off with proteins at sort of 12 and a half 3 years ago when we first grew our first milling wheat, and now we're at proteins of 13.8 and falling Hagbergs of 280 on average. So we're hugely pleased, and that's using less fertilizer and less pesticides. So continuing on with the theme of monitoring, one thing we have done with cover crops is we've developed quite a good relationship with King's Crops. We run a number of demonstration days for them, and in return they've been doing cut down analysis and VS scores, looking at earthworms and things like that. And it's really fascinating to see potentially the amount of nutrients that we've intercepted and stopped going off down the drain or sinking too deep into the soil profile. So it is honestly fascinating when you collect 3 or 4 years worth of data and compare the fertilizer prices of that year, just how much you could have saved by taking this step, not as well as the benefits of developing the soil structure and having that continuously living mulch. So we said to keep an eye on the future. So one thing that has changed this year is that we've changed our strategy and our focus. We can't really reduce our pesticide usage anymore in the way that we were approaching our growing of crops. So we've swapped from focusing on pesticides to focusing on nutrition. So generally speaking, as farmers, we give plants what they need to survive. If a crop develops yellow rust or any kind of disease, if you can see the rust, it's too late. The plant is already sick. So why can't we give or treat the crop like we would our children and give them the nutrients they need to avoid the issue in the first place? So really focusing on the micro and macronutrients, looking at compost teas, that sort of thing. That's the direction that we're changing towards. To that end, we've just bought a secondhand sprayer to allow us to do that. The area we're in, it's very tricky to find somebody who's willing to try these novel or crazy ideas. So that's been a big issue for our business. But as we move forward, we're continually investing in allowing us to have the facilities to do it in-house. We're also continuing to develop our rotation. We are growing a wild farmed crop of wheat this year, so we're bicropping, which presents a lot of opportunities, but also a few nightmares. If we putting the wheat and the beans together, then we don't want the wheat to follow with beans again the next year because of disease issues. So what other things can we put in between to allow that rotation to continuously to work seamlessly as it has been doing? So we're looking into niche crops, and I've given a few examples here. The sunflowers, which I've mentioned we've done this year. I'm really interested in the potential of pumpkins. So going down that nutritional route, we grow 15 million pumpkins in the UK every year, and they all go to have their faces carved into them and things like that. Very few are used for human consumption, but pumpkins also have the most oil-rich seed in the world. So why can't we do what the Austrians and the Chinese and the Americans do and grow pumpkins for oil? And then use that as an alternative to oilseed rape, which has a whole plethora of issues and requires an awful lot of looking after. So that's the sort of thing that I'm looking at doing. And then also playing with varieties and blends are a new thing for us. So putting different varieties of the same cereal together with different traits to try and reduce the amount of risk there is with disease. And finally, agroforestry is something that's in our sights moving forward. Moving briefly to the livestock side, so we have 50 cattle on the farm currently. They're in 2 store contracts, basically for 2 major supermarkets. So the first are Aberdeen Angus for Sainsbury's. They're on their low carbon game changer scheme. And the second are Wagyu cross cattle from Dairy Cattle. They are with Warrendale. Sainsbury's are very focused on carbon, and Warrendale are more after quality. We also have tax sheep as well, because I completely agree that the best sheep are the ones that you don't own yourselves. So yeah, we basically utilize the 54 acres of permanent pasture, and we've been doing an awful lot of things with that pasture. Like Laura, we have introduced cell grazing into the system, and we found that not only have we reduced our fertilizer output inputs to virtually zero, but we've also reduced our animal drug use to virtually zero. We haven't used any wormers this year, despite it being one of the wettest summers on record. And we also find that by doing so, we do get consistent growth curves. We are able to offset the risk of climate change. Herbal lays are brilliant in dry spells and wet spells. You just find that different plants thrive in the different conditions, but you continue to develop soil health and soil drainage, soil structure. But there's always something for the cattle to eat, and it just keeps the farm ticking along nicely and really reduces the workload for us. So yeah, I've got a bit ahead of myself, but we've got the livestock because we love livestock. We believe in mixed farming. It helps to balance the workload, and it's a great integration with our wider arable system as well. I've said that we predominantly sell graze outside, and this is something that we are making larger and larger every year, as is the integration of more and more herbs. We're experimenting like Laura. We're stitching in and trying all sorts of different things. We do currently bring the cattle inside in the winter because our soil structures are difficult to maintain if we poach the ground too much, and we haven't quite got enough dry ground to keep the cattle safe over the winter without causing problems for the fields. Monitoring is a big part of this, particularly with having supply contracts to major supermarkets. So Sainsbury's mandate that we weigh the cattle every so many weeks. So we have access, we have a cattle weigh system, and that does help to create a picture of what's going on the farm in terms of growth rates and things like that. But also it helps us to diagnose issues, like we were saying about the crops. You can, if you notice a weight change early enough, you can do something about it before it becomes a real problem. So moving the livestock forward, I think the thing that we really wish to do is move away from the commercial cattle of the supermarkets, because it's very difficult to have an animal that you can properly finish on grass, particularly in our system with our climate. That's come out of it, got half its parentage in a dairy cow. Laura may disagree, but we'll see. We'll agree to disagree maybe. But we would really like to take on an animal that's more suited to our area and our climate. And the Gloucester cow on the right is probably the way we're thinking. Otherwise, something like a Sussex, something where we can not only benefits our soils, but also start to tell that story, much like Tracy and David are telling that story. We want to be able to market our animal and tell that story and show how it connects into the wider food production cycle. One real bit of trivia for everybody in the audience: if anybody can recognize the breed in the middle at the bottom, I will be really impressed, because there's not very many of those in the UK anymore, and it is on the endangered list. We're also doing other things to enhance natural habitat, creating windbreaks and things like that. So we've planted 1.5 kilometers of new hedgerows, which is really helping with wildlife corridors and windbreaks, and it's doing an awful lot for the farm, not just from an environmental point of view, but from a financial point of view as well. by providing that shelter and helping the grass to grow and keeping fields warm when they otherwise wouldn't be warm. We've bought in wildlife plots on land that's corners of fields that aren't really efficient, and that's helping to bring in natural predators to reduce the need for pesticides and things like that. So there's lots of little things that you can do, and farms might already be doing, but they just don't realize it helps them in more ways than what they initially planned. Other considerations for us, we set great store in taking time to really think about the machinery that we buy. It sounds simple, but when you sit in a dealership and they're offering you a 200 horsepower tractor for the same price as a 150 horsepower tractor, and they just say, oh, well, of course you need the more power, but the truth of the matter is that you're probably going to be paying for it in more diesel over that tractor's lifetime, and then you'll trick yourself into buying that bigger plow that you really don't need, and it spirals out of control. So that's one thing we do is think, do we actually need that machine? Does it need to be that big? Do we need to do it in that way? Is there a more efficient way of doing it? The other thing that we've noticed from an economic point of view is asking ourselves is, the contractor might be cheaper than you doing it on paper, but what are the unconsidered costs of bringing somebody in who just wants to leave the farm as soon as they've arrived? And that leads to investment decisions that are actually, they can be more environmentally friendly as well, and much more produce a lot greater resilience in your business model. Thinking about combining this year, for instance, it's been really, really wet, and the contractor, there's very few windows in which they can go. They want to come in, cut your corn and leave, but that might mean that your wheat comes in really wet, or your beans, or something like that. So having that flexibility and that viability to go when you need to go can be a much more economically viable path, considering the climate that we are currently living in. And then energy, I can very feasibly see us turning to electric telehandlers when we renew our telehandler. Solar power would not be viable until we made that switch, simply because we don't have a consistent usage of electricity. Our grain dryer uses an awful lot of electricity for a very short period of time if it's wet, but the rest of the time it's sitting idle. So by bringing in electrically powered machines like a telehandler would really change the way that we can look at electricity in what we do. So the last thing that I'd say has really helped, and I'm sure others will agree, is that by networking and collaborating with others, you can learn an awful lot, and it really improve the resilience of your business from in all aspects. And it's free, and it's really worthwhile. Partnerships are what have made our farm business what it is today, and I'd really encourage you all to really consider doing that if it's not something you're doing already. I think that's it from me. So thank you. I'll stop sharing my screen.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Andrew. And yeah, it's really good to get a proper insight into your farm. I know that you have so much going on. So I was hoping to kind of take the chair's privilege and ask my own questions as they were slow to come through, but now they're coming in. So I think with the time available to us, I think it's best to answer the questions coming in from attendees. First of all, Jeff Hooper has asked what your bedding systems are, so straw or slats. I assume this is going to Laura and Andrew as well, if you as well.
I'll go first. Well, we only have bedding for the calves, which is all straw, farmyard manure. Everything else is outwintered or kept outside. So for us, it's just straw and farmyard manure, which we can then utilise back on the arable land for the barley.
We're the same. We only bale what straw we need for the winter. So the rest is all chopped and reincorporated into the fields. We are planning to experiment with bokashi compost this year, in a really simple experiment, just spraying that onto the straw to help break down and to turn it into compost in a really simplified way. But yeah, we're all straw as well.
Yeah. Have you found that that you, since incorporating straw into your fields, you've increased the slug burden at all?
So slugs have never really been a problem on our farm because we're such light sandy soil. I caveat that up until this year where it's just been really wet. However, we've found ways of mitigating that without the needs for using slug pellets.
Yeah. And then for this one's will be for Laura. The performance from Angus Smith, the performance of young stock is hard to get right and susceptible to many variables. What tools do you use to monitor KPIs, so key performance indicators, and KRIs, which I think are key risk indicators?
Yeah, well, we've I suppose this is I suppose relating to the calf rearing enterprise. We've got a really strong, solid set of protocols. So within the rearing stage, which is realistically 0 to probably 12 to 14 weeks, we have sort of weight performance sort of bands that we want to hit. Obviously, we have sort of a standard feed plan. We don't really wean to a weight. We sort of wean to feed intake, and a little bit based on age as well. We obviously want them to be doing a certain sort of daily live weight gain over those periods. We don't, I think also probably because we're a grass-based system as well, we don't really want to push them too hard, if that makes sense. So I know some people might think feed conversion efficiency, let's whack, one in and get, or sorry, two in and get one out at that stage. I suppose you've got to be quite careful with nutritional plane of performance as well, because obviously if you push them too hard, you can have other problems later on. So we do weigh regularly, and also we have financial KPIs as well. We try and make sure that we have our vet and med spend under a certain amount. We use a lot of vaccinations, prevention, and sort of making sure that everything else is right. It's, you don't really want to end up, and we try and aim for a mortality as well. We want to aim for sort of under 1% mortality in those 600 calves as well. So the financials come into it just as much as the performance.
Aaron, I think you muted some way.
That's so annoying. That's classic, isn't it? Happens in every online meeting, doesn't it? Yeah, apologies by that. So a question from Deborah Crossan. How do you keep informed and inspired to try on new methodologies? Where do your ideas come from? And how do you filter the good ideas from the bad? And I think that's going out to everyone. So if David and Tracy, you guys could start, that'd be brilliant.
So we're members of 2 farm clusters. So we attend, probably apart from in the summer months, a meeting every month. So we meet with lots of other farmers. In reality, none of those are doing the sort of farming we're doing, but that doesn't matter because it's surprising what cross-pollinates and comes across and what you can pick up in some of the, particularly in things like the SFI schemes and things like that, and even IPM and things like that. There's a lot of crossover that is relevant to what we're doing, even though we're not farming the same as the others. I'm always looking on the internet, so I'm always seeing what events are coming up and what's being shared. So I went to a strip tillage event only a few weeks ago, where and that was actually on a market garden, which is quite unusual. Although obviously we're an interesting side because we're a market garden, we're very mechanised, and so my previous knowledge is from much bigger scale farming. So I try and bring one of the sort of the big industry stuff and scale it down into what we do. So I'm always looking at the bigger picture and trying to scale into what we do. So, but I think on the online's a lot of stuff, talking to other farmers and making sure, you try and get involved with as many things that are going on and don't sit still. You've never got it right. We've always got to keep learning because no one knows it all. And if you did know it, would be boring. We need to be proactive and try and work out what's the next best step and what would work and trial it. That's all you can do in trial.
And try and allocate at tea break, instead of sitting scrolling on your phone mindlessly, try and allocate, do a bit of reading, and I guess we're really lucky because we bounce ideas off each other all the time and go, what do you think? No, I'm not sure about that. Or, oh, okay, yeah.
And also
yeah.
in small businesses, and lots of farms are quite small businesses, it's quite easy to agree something and do something, be proactive and not
Yeah.
just sit on and ponder. And you haven't got, a managing director or this financial team, controlling you. You can just I'll set that bit aside and I'll do something. And that
Yeah.
works, doesn't it?
Yeah, start small.
Experiment.
Yeah, brilliant. And I mean, you guys mentioned previously that you work a lot with your local community. Do you get ideas getting from your local community?
Do we get ideas to the local community? There are some things bubble up, and we've got a young team that work with us. We have up to 9 young people, school age, and they sometimes throw something. So we have what's the command we do with them? We go through their appraisals. So we do 360 appraisals with our youngsters, and they start with us at 13, and they stay normally to about 18. And it's surprising what they see. And it's important to engage people outside agriculture as well, because it's surprising how people see your business and what you're doing and what you can learn from them and what they don't understand and what that sometimes is quite useful.
Much more use listening to the why do you do that? If you listen to people questioning you, it does make you think, well, why do we do that? Which is more use perhaps than the people who come in and say what you should do. and the answer to that is always, if I had £1 for every person who told me what I should do, I wouldn't need to farm.
So Andrew, could you answer that question as well? Is that right?
Yeah, I think I'd echo exactly what Tracy and David have said. Getting involved with local groups generally stimulates thought and things like that. I come from an engineering background, as I said, and I'm very accustomed to sort of observing a problem and then in my mind wondering how I might change that or resolve that issue. So a lot of problem solving goes out there, and other events like going to Groundswell and events like that, it really stimulates thought when you can see all these different people doing amazingly different things and wondering if, in some small way, could you take a piece of their jigsaw and put it into your jigsaw to make it solve your problem? So yeah, and then in terms of getting involved with trials, again, what David said, get yourself out there. A lot of my projects have come from really just putting myself out there and giving it a go with Leaf, with Innovation for Agriculture, all those sorts of things. It's really worth just putting yourself out there to try it. You meet amazing people, you learn amazing things, and then there will be stuff that you can use on your own farm.
Brilliant. Thank you, Andrew. Laura, anything to add?
I won't add too much because we're running out of time, but I suppose something we find incredibly useful is peer-to-peer discussion groups. So those farmer-to-farmer discussion groups, they can be in person, they can be on Teams, and quite often they could be a WhatsApp group or something. But I think peer-to-peer learning it's a fantastic way because everybody's very honest and open with what they've done and what's gone wrong and what's gone right. So that's also a really fantastic way to sort of to get knowledge and information shared.
Yeah, brilliant. And just quickly, just asked another one to you, Laura. Calf rating powdered milk question mark.
Yeah, we use milk powder because obviously we're not a dairy farm, so we have to use a milk replacer. Yeah.
Yeah.
And so we try, and again, if it's relating to milk replacer, we try and choose the best kind of quality and constituents that will sustain the growth that we need.
Brilliant. And last question before we all have to go. From Stephen Manders, when using agricultural technologies, e.g. to measure and monitor soil health, carbon storage and sequestration, so on and so forth, have you been satisfied with the technologies that you've used? If not, why not? For instance, with the technological integration effectiveness, or simply getting it to do what you want to do, what agricultural technologies would you want to integrate within your agricultural practices but have not been able to do? So basically a general question about agricultural tech, ag tech, software systems that have helped maybe specifically on soil health, carbon storage. I'm going to throw this one to Andrew first.
Stephen knows my answer to this because he's interviewed me before, but I think the real problem with all these technologies is that they're not compatible with one another. So you can do a test on one system and then want to transcribe that or transfer that into the result from that into another system to make another decision, and you simply cannot do it because the softwares won't talk to one another. There's no universal file format. So that would be my issue with agricultural technology at the moment.
And Tracy and David?
We were at a agri-tech conference yesterday. It was very interesting because it's a world away from what we're doing. And I think one of the most useful lines that we heard is that any tech that you're using needs to be the co-pilot, and we need to not expect the tech to be able to do everything. We need to remember that we're the ones who are connected to the soil. We're the ones who need to have our hands in the compost heap, and anything else should be complementing what we're doing, not replacing the human knowledge and understanding of our land.
You know, in a farming scenario, there's so many variables that we can't control, and that tech can't deal with that. And a really funny line came up, and it was talking about automated tractors, and they can't teach them where the wet spots are in the field.
And we were just like,
what are you talking about? Is that the farmer knows? The tractor doesn't know, so it just drives in the wet spot because it's got no idea.
Yeah.
That just sums it up, really.
Yeah.
I think in a nutshell.
I think we need to be careful. We can waste a lot of time trying to get something to work rather than working with what we already know.
And the farmer doing the work.
Yeah, we went on the train to the conference. We spent 20 minutes, 2 phones and 3 different cards trying to pay for the parking. It was ridiculous. Like, we could have just, and that's because we've got so caught up in you have to have this system, or you have to have this app, or you have this is going to do everything for you. And no, it's not. It's not helpful. So yeah, know what's useful, and remember that you maybe know a lot more than you think. Don't rely on some anonymous system that thinks it knows better.
Yeah, brilliant. Very wise. And Laura, any opinions on ag tech?
Not well, pretty much exactly the same. Andrew took the words out of my mouth. There's no sort of API system that talks to another one, so you have one data set that won't go to another. So that is frustrating. But I think AI can be great. But again, like I echo back, we just can't collect a load of data if it's actually not going to be useful. Whatever we're doing using tech, it has to actually benefit the business. Otherwise, we risk wasting time when we could actually have our hands in the dirt and make those decisions very, very quickly.
Yeah. I mean, funnily enough, I sat next to a guy on a train yesterday, and his business was literally linking up software so they can talk to each other, and but mainly in the security and that kind of world. But he is transitioning into agriculture, so you never know. Hopefully, there are always developments. So yeah, I think on that, we're gonna have to close this webinar. But I just want to thank each and every one of you. You are very diverse in your knowledge and your systems and your approach, and thank you so much for contributing to this webinar, and thank you so much for your time, and I hope you have a wonderful weekend.
Thank you.
Thank you.